NVIDIA's Terrible 50 series launch was a great opportunity for AMD to become relevant again in the market of dedicated GPUs, because as much as people love to shit on NVIDIA at every chance, and in my opinion, in most cases even rightfully so, in the end we all end up buying NVIDIA GPUs for our own systems. You don't believe me? Well then, let's go take a look at Steam charts where you can see what GPUs people use the most for their builds. And keep in mind, this takes into account everyone who simply installs Steam on their systems. It's not a sample only for hardcore gamers, whatever that word even means nowadays. As you can see, the top 30 GPUs is virtually dominated by NVIDIA, and contrary to the beliefs of many permanently online console glazers, no, the most common PC builds are not $3,000 builds that run worse than a PS4, but it's in fact mostly the low budget 60 segments that sell the most, with the most recent 3060 and 4060 dominating together with their Ti variants, quickly followed by the mid-tier, the 70 segment with 3070 and 4070, 3070 Ti, and what is in my opinion the best card released by NVIDIA last gen, the 4070 Super, which is also the card that I own for myself. And this is exactly going to be the focus of the video, as a follow-up to the one I did on the day of the release of the RTX 5070. In that video, I set out 3 steps that AMD needed to follow to grant themselves a victory over NVIDIA in the 70 segment, the mid-tier. Step 1. Simple availability. The cards needed to be available in huge quantity right away in every market, and this looked somewhat promising at first, with positive Reddit posts and Newegg and Amazon orders following through, just to have those orders in fact cancelled and seeing people not receiving their cards in the end, except of course a lucky few. Step 2 was to simply stay within MSRP. The official prices for the 9070 and 9070 XT are $549 and $599, therefore direct competitors of the RTX 5070, a card with an MSRP of $549. But the street price closer to $750 for the RTX 5070, while currently being also out of stock, is actually extremely negative. And also comparing it to the 4070 Super, which is again the card I think was truly the best purchase from the last gen, it was still available around $600 street price up to the end of December, early January. And in fact, some RX 9070 were sold to a similar price, about $600, but only a handful of lucky people got it at that price, with the vast majority of cards sold at $650, $700 plus, up to even $800. And stock quickly got emptied out, with the card being basically out of stock everywhere except for a few bundles on Newegg and such. So step 2 in the end, in my opinion, was also a big failure from AMD, not being able to keep the RX 9070 especially at an MSRP or close to MSRP. Step 3 was the performance. So what I said is that all they needed to do was to have bare minimum the performances of a 4070 for the RX 9070 and a 4070 Super for the XT in raster, and they did that brilliantly without a sweat, being actually closer and in some cases better than the 5070 itself in raster. So regarding the performance step, I have nothing negative to say. AMD actually delivered. So I also took 4070 and 4070 Super as baselines for this, because NVIDIA had the brilliant idea to discontinue those two products for whatever reason. So these two cards just needed to take the place of the 4070 and 4070 Super, and they would have sold simply a lot of cards by staying close to MSRP and being available. So as of today, I think AMD's launch was a failure, but the opposite of NVIDIA's type of failure. In fact, the failure is not in the quality of the product, but in availability, and also because MSRP is completely losing its meaning as a word and a concept, like Gamers Nexus says and explains very well in their video about the topic. I hope they manage to resupply these cards ASAP, and also tell the third-party brands to stay reasonable with the up price for custom cards, because a 40 but even 30% increase over MSRP justifies more than a segment jump, meaning, you know, a 90-80 basically, which is absurd to justify for just a simple extra fan on my GPU, or like 5 less Celsius degrees of heat produced. And then we got the leaks for the RTX 5060 and the Ti version, and even the 5050. So we have a comeback of the 50 segment that was skipped for the 40 series, and I'm glad to see it come back because, like I always say, there's no bad products in my opinion, only bad prices. So at the correct price, the 50 segment can be an amazing product with several applications for it. So we'll see on that once the card comes out and we have more details on it, if it actually delivers or it's just another bad product from Nvidia. But before going into details of these 3 leaks, I want to think out loud and point out this. For those people who are waiting to upgrade their GPU or need a new GPU for a new build and whatnot, when would be the right price and right moment to buy? Because up to early January, like I said, you could get a 4070 for about $500 and a 4070 Super for about $600, which was also true in Europe for a 530 euro for the 4070, a 640 euro for the Super variant. So again, just like a 30-40 euro increase. Still far from MSRP for the cards, but reasonable prices for what the market has become, again, at least since 2020, for what is the mid-tier segment. So again, you expect to pay about $500 for a mid-tier GPU and about $600 for, that extra boost that is the Super variant. And this mid-tier I would describe as being able to play at 1080p but without making any compromise on graphical details and FPS, or playing at 4040p with some little fine-tuning and acceptance of a bit of a reduction on FPS, or either details on, again, the most modern games and the ones that have to come, let's say, up to 2 to 3 years since the card's release. That's how I would describe a mid-tier segment card. Like, that's what the card needs to deliver, needs to be able to do. Instead, now, to access the 70 segment, the mid-tier segment, with the AMD Nvidia's launches, you'll have to pay a premium and go up to $750 at least. So we had a 25% spike in price for the what is effectively the mid-tier. So does the drop on our RTX 5060 risks to increase the entry-level segment prices to something closer to $450-500? Especially if the 4060 gets discontinued, that would be a terrible case scenario. So yeah, nowadays I legit would not know what to suggest to people who ask advice on their builds, especially if they're on a budget. If it's better to get a 4060 Ti before they disappear, or better to wait for the 5060 series and hope that Nvidia markets enough of them and keeps them at their MSRP low. But only time will tell, and honestly, trusting and being optimistic for Nvidia's products, oh boy. So getting quickly into the cards themselves, besides them having a TDP that's a bit too high in my opinion for what needs to be the entry-level segment, they definitely look like they could have simply been basically the 4060 Super and the 4060 Ti Super respectively. The upgrade is relatively minimal, and on paper of course, and besides multi-frame generation, they have no other different software upgrade or trick up their sleeve. And from what we saw, multi-frame generation is definitely not usable right now for gaming yet, in my opinion. The latency issue is still way too big, and the 5060 Ti will have at least an 8GB and also a 16GB version, which is something a lot of people wanted, so that could be very nice. But again, price and availability will decide if this is a good or a bad thing, or simply, a thing you can ignore. After all, that's the only negative I got with the 4070 Super myself. Only 12GB of VRAM, which was making me feel FOMO for the 5070 at first, until we found out that the 5070 itself also has 12GB. So at that point, it was clear to me Nvidia was really taking the piss with its customers. So yeah, I think for the entry-level segment, the 60 segment, AMD and maybe even Intel also got a good chance to get a good portion of the market this year if they play their cards well, which, as you saw, it's actually the biggest battleground, the one most people are interested in. While for mid-tier, the 70 segment, I would say right now you're basically fucked. The old cards are discontinued, while the new cards cost as much as what the 80 segment should cost basically. So you're better off trying your luck on the used market or getting an AMD RX 7800 XT, which goes for about $500, 520 euro, but performs very similarly to an RTX 4070 3070 in roster. That is in my opinion, of course, only if you absolutely cannot wait and need a GPU for your build. Otherwise, I would still suggest you wait and see if at least AMD stocks go up again for their 70 segment. But yeah, with that said, thank you for watching, take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and bye bye.